identity verification is changing. Few know that better than Alan Goode, CEO and Chief Analyst at Goode Intelligence. I'm Joel McConvey. Today on the Biometric Update podcast, Alan walks us through his latest research report on IDV, which looks at market and technology analysis, adoption strategies, and forecasts for 2025 to 2030. Alan foresees reusable identity overtaking traditional IDV in that time frame, and forecasts that by 2030, total global revenue from identity verification services will exceed $20 billion. Here's my chat with Alan Goode. At the end of last month, I guess, you released a report on identity verification. We'd love to hear some of what's in that report, what you found and where the market is going. You've described a bit of a transition as far as the digital ecosystem goes. So what can you tell us about that?
And thanks for the invitation. It's always good to talk about the latest research. This is a rapidly changing market that is in the process of transitioning away from the reliance on physical government-issued identity documents, passports, driver's licenses, national ID cards, to verify people's identity in digital scenarios. So this is replacing traditional identity verification methods that typically involve scanning in and authenticating a physical identity document, capturing and verifying a face biometric, and then corroborating data collected along with any additional identity data from third-party sources. So the market is transitioning to the use of reusable digital identity verification. As we are in this transition, it is difficult to say with 100% certainty what the new model will actually look like and how much of the old model will last and remain. What we can say is there are a number of options available, and that choice will be influenced by regional factors like culture and regulation. So reusable digital identity verification can be based on, the following scenarios, I believe. So that includes the verification of government-issued digital identity, which is the digitalization of the existing physical documents, and that includes digital passports, which is mainly the digital travel credential, the DTC, the digital driver's license, the mobile driver's license, the MDL, and national identity. And also what we're seeing is another option, which is the verification of government-issued digital identity, which is new digital identity designed for online government and private sector services. So the best example of that is the EU digital identity wallet. And then we have the verification of, the third option is the verification of identity service providers issued digital identity, which can be in accordance with a government framework, a certification program.
The Goode Intelligence report identifies what Alan calls the technology building blocks of identity verification, tech that is pivotal to the development and operation of IDV systems.
Biometrics, digital identity wallets, public key infrastructure, PKI, privacy, orchestration service providers, OSPs, which are integrating reusable and wallet-based components into the business layer, making it seamless for customers and perform digital identity verification, verifiable credentials, and digital trust services. So what we mean by digital trust services it includes services like digital certificate authorities, electronic signatures for verifying documents, and secure electronic delivery systems for sensitive information. And in the EU context, these are the qualified trusted service providers, the QTSPs, that must undergo an independent conformity assessment and audit by an accredited institution under the EU eIDAS regulation, which looks at areas such as security, level of trust, and quality. So yeah.
I want to touch on one specific note, which is the OSPs, the orchestration service providers. There was this concern among the community that the government efforts, particularly in the UK, to provide an age assurance solution might sort of choke the market. And Peter Kyle kind of came out and said, the technology secretary, and he said, actually, we're enabling the market, and pointed out in particular that OSPs were going to be kind of, winners in this scenario, or said, definitely identified a spot for them, a specific spot for them in the ecosystem. So what are your thoughts on that discussion about, the government wallet projects versus businesses that they've, in many cases, incubated or fostered?
Yeah, I think yes and no. And I think it was really important for him to come out and the government to come out and reassure the market, I think, because there's been a lot of investment in this, and we don't want a situation where the rug's been pulled away, with a change of government policy. And I think I can concur with that. I think there is a lot of opportunity. Service providers, relying parties can derive information from the trusted digital identities and daisy chain identity from them to be used for certain scenarios, perhaps in certain sectors. So that's one opportunity, I think, is that kind of derived identity market. And then I think there's a lot of opportunity in that space. But also with the OSPs, I think there is. It's a case of a raw credential, and it's a case of how do you use it? How do I integrate that into? If I'm a large corporate company and I want to better onboard new employees, and I want to check their identity, then you can just use that. Yes, it is. Yes, it is Alan Goode who wants to start this new job. But then you can bring in, data from other sources to check things like professional qualifications, university degrees, etc., and then create that assurance that I'm employing someone who's fit for purpose for a job. But that initial identity verification, it is I am Alan Goode and I have the right to work in the UK or any other country. It's that trust anchor, that starting point. So, and also we expect, in addition to the forecast revenue opportunity figure of over $20 billion, which is the figure for the total identity verification market, revenue market, we expect a further 15 to 20 billion in revenue from these connected technology building blocks that are crucial to delivering identity verification services, and that includes the OSPs.
This sort of brings up another question, which is, if people are looking for trusted names with which to engage with this system, what's going to stop everybody from just going to Google, Apple, and having big tech sort of be once again the dominant force in this particular sector?
Yeah, I think that traditional IDV vendors will continue to operate in what is still a growing market. And in fact, the shift away from the reliance on physical identity documents will create, I think, a boom for them, as issuance of digital identity will require robust identity verification based on existing standards and technologies. Big tech is definitely positioning itself with digital wallets and verification services. We've seen a number of important announcements from Google and Apple this year. And that includes the APIs to support age verification and identity verification. But I believe that the market will be big enough to support other suppliers. New models for identity verification are complex with many, many, many components, and the report identifies and analyzes the technology building blocks of identity verification, which we referenced earlier on. And I think so. This will provide an opportunity for suppliers in this space. And I think if we compare it to the tokenized payment market with dominance of Google and Apple for payments, there is a big piece of infrastructure that is outside of the big tech. I mentioned about PKI, I mentioned about identity issuance, and then that identity issuance and management of that credential. I think there is, a big part to play by the big tech, but I don't think it's going to be the death of other kind of suppliers in this market.
Mm-hmm. To that end, I'd like to talk a bit about mobile driver's licenses. Where do they fit into this puzzle? And what are your thoughts on where that whole technology is going?
Yeah, it's an interesting development, I think, for nations that do not operate a national identity scheme. And the use of a secure digital identity credential outside of its prime application, obviously, which is the permit to drive, giving someone permission to drive. So, and our research shows that there's increasing adoption around the world, including Australia, Denmark, the Netherlands, South Korea, and a number of states in the US. Also, the UK is looking to introduce its MDL in the second half of 2025, which is not too far away. So, ever optimistic. And so we're going to see with the Australian adoption where selected attributes from the MDL can be presented or attested when requested. For instance, when a verified requests the age of a person requesting to access age-appropriate content or restricted goods, like alcohol, only the age-related attribute needs to be presented, not the whole MDL. So that's based in the ISO standards there, which has benefits from a security and in particular a privacy perspective. An MDL is used for identity verification by presenting it to a relying party, which then verifies the data through digital signatures and device-based authentication. This verification confirms that the data has been transferred securely and untampered from the original source, ensuring only the device owner can view and share the MDL's data. But like any form of digital identity, acceptance of a credential by a digital service provider is critical to its success. So even if a country or a state supports the issuance of an MDL, you have to be able to use it somewhere and have the legal framework to support it. And this is really essential in acceptance. So, to conclude, I think the MDLs do show a lot of promise, international standards, but it must be backed by the issuer to ensure it can be accepted and legally used.
Mm-hmm. Again, that's a nice transition into a question about regional differences in the IDV market. There are subtle differences in the UK, in the EU, and certainly in America, in the US, in terms of how legislation is coming about and how these different systems are being deployed. Do you have thoughts on the kind of influence that regional differences will play in the development of the overall ecosystem?
Yeah, and I think what's really important to emphasise here that there are many ways to identify a person, and there are different models around the world that are based on both decentralised and centralised digital identity systems. There's no really one method to rule them all, and it's important that we really view the global picture and examine different methods of verifying identity. And that's what we attempt to do in the report. So often we view the world through the lens of the West, and this is very skewed to digital identity wallets and verifiable credentials for identity verification. And that's the new model. But we also need to examine what's happening in some of the large population areas like Africa, the Indian subcontinent, Latin America, China, and Southeast Asia, to get a broader understanding of identity verification models and technology. So, it's a case of really, I think, kind of widening our own perspective on what's happening around the world. I would call out, like MOSIP, who are doing a great deal of work in the standards, and we're seeing a number of MOSIP-inspired kind of deployments around the world, and I think that's in contrast to some of the VC stuff and the identity wallet kind of movements. So yeah.
Yeah, it's fascinating, right? Because nations like India and China, the size of whole continents, they're their own whole universes in terms of administration and whatnot. And certainly Aadhaar in India has been an interesting thing to watch develop.
Yeah, and the foundation Aadhaar, it does have its critics. It's a centralized biometric database. There's questions about the security and privacy of that. But what they're building, and they're building other services off that. So we did some work in travel traditional identity last year, and I saw some recent stats for the Yatra system, which is derived from creating this kind of seamless travel experience, but based on the universal ID. And I think recently, I can't off the top of my head, tell you exactly, but the numbers are very, very good and very encouraging for the adoption.
Travel is an interesting one because it makes it exponentially easier for people. So I think that's where you really get buy-in on biometrics and IDV and these kinds of things. I want to talk a bit more just before we wrap up about the numbers. What's in store for the IDV market, revenue-wise, in terms of market growth? Where is this going to be in the next 5-10 years?
We are in that transition space, and in the report we did call out when we do believe that we'll get kind of peak traditional identity verification, and then we'll see new models become more dominant, and that's both from an adoption and also a revenue perspective. So revenue opportunity over 20 billion. But on top of that, as I said, you've got all those other kind of the technology building blocks that we kind of call out, and I think that there's a lot of opportunity, and that includes, face biometric verification, liveness detection, defect detection, PKI kind of certificate issuance, those other digital trust services surrounding this, verifiable credentials, the wallet owners, the wallet issuers, etc. So there's a bigger market here, really. As I said, I think it's one of the most intriguing studies that we've done in the last kind of 10, 15 years, because it's in this state of transition. And I think it's difficult to kind of call out, and it's also very interesting to kind of understand where or how successful the EU digital identity wallet will be in terms of adoption, whether it will fall foul of what the IDAS one experience, and that it was successful for government, but really didn't get the buy-in from private business. So I think that's and also I said that in terms of for MDLs, you need to have that verification network. You need to have businesses on board to accept this, to buy into this new form of digital identity verification. So that is a very critical area, I think, and will have an impact on whether we'll see good adoption, excellent adoption, or less than favorable adoption, I think.
Yeah, it's fascinating. It often, I think, boils down to the same thing, which is the tech is there, but will people use it? And do they trust it? And will people accept it? We can do it, but will we? This is the question.
Absolutely, yeah.
If people want to access your report, Alan, where would they find it?
If you go to the it's goodeintelligence.com, so that's GOODE intelligence.com, and then you'll be able to kind of find resources about in terms of what the report has and the forecast for that as well. So.
Thank you very much for your time today. Very much appreciated.
Thanks, John.
All right, thanks, Alan. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Thanks again to Alan Goode for joining us. Visit goodeintelligence.com to find out how to access the full report, and check out biometricupdate.com for more insights into today's identity market.